I was standing in line at airport security when the email notification pinged. Emergency alert. Unusual activity in primary account. My heart dropped as I tapped the notification. The balance in our retirement account, where we'd amassed over $380,000 across 22 years of marriage, showed just $237.42. Sir, please step forward. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The TSA agent waved at me impatiently. I pocketed my phone, my fingers suddenly numb. I was heading home after 6 months overseeing construction of a hydroelectric dam in northern Canada. 6 months of 16-hour days, bitter cold, and missing my wife Lisa's birthday for the first time in our marriage. 6 months of sending nearly every dollar of my consultant's fee to our joint savings. 6 months of calling every night, telling her I missed her, never once suspecting she was emptying our life's work into some invisible sinkhole. My name is Thomas Reed. I'm 54, a civil engineering consultant who specializes in large-scale infrastructure projects, primarily dams and bridges. I spend months at a time in remote locations, earning substantial paychecks that Lisa and I had been channeling toward an early retirement plan. At least, that's what I thought we were doing. I somehow made it through security and to my gate on autopilot, my mind racing through possibilities. A bank error, identity theft, some elaborate technical glitch. I called Lisa, but it went straight to voicemail. I tried our bank, navigating an infuriating automated system, before being told a manager would have to discuss the activity with me in person at my home branch in Portland. We'll be boarding in 15 minutes, the gate attendant announced. I sent Lisa a text. Something's wrong with our account. Call me immediately. No response. I called our neighbor, Eleanor, a retired school teacher who watered our plants when we were away. Tom, I thought you weren't back until tomorrow, she said. I'm not. I'm at the airport in Montreal. Have you seen Lisa today? A pause. No, not today, but there was quite a commotion at your house yesterday. Moving truck. I assumed you were having furniture delivered. My throat tightened. Moving truck? Yes, a big one. And Lisa was with some man I didn't recognize. Middle-aged fellow, very well dressed. I waved, but she seemed in a hurry. I thanked Eleanor and hung up, feeling like I'd been punched in the stomach. When I boarded the plane, I ordered a whiskey, something I never do while traveling. The businessman next to me must have sensed my distress. Rough day? He asked. You could say that, I replied, staring at the amber liquid. I think my wife just left me and took all our money. He looked uncomfortable, mumbled something sympathetic, and buried himself in his laptop. I didn't blame him. What do you say to that? During the 6-hour flight, I pieced things together as best I could, reviewing our account on the spotty airplane Wi-Fi. The withdrawals had started small 3 months ago. 2,000 here, 5,000 there, transfers to an account I didn't recognize. Then 2 weeks ago, a massive transfer of $250,000, and finally yesterday, the remaining $118,000, leaving just enough to avoid triggering the zero balance notifications. I also found email confirmations for 3 wire transfers to a bank in Arizona, a state where we knew no one, or at least where I knew no one. Between my 3rd whiskey and the sleeping pills I'd taken, I drifted into a heavy, dreamless sleep. When I woke as we landed in Portland, my initial shock had crystallized into something harder, colder, more focused. I grabbed my carry-on and deplaned, switching my phone off airplane mode. A text from my oldest friend and accountant, Alan Parker. Call me ASAP. I dialed him from the taxi line. Tom, Jesus, where are you? His voice was tight with concern. Just landed in Portland. My house, apparently. You know about the money? I got an alert when the second big transfer went through. Lisa called. Imi said you two were making an investment in some Arizona property development. Wanted me to send the official documents. Something felt off. I stalled her. The taxi pulled up. I climbed in, gave the driver my address. She's been planning this, Alan. Moving truck yesterday. She's gone. There's something else. His voice dropped lower. The bank sent over verification requests for new lines of credit taken out in both your names. 3 new credit cards maxed out at $25,000 each. And a home equity line against your house for $175,000. The numbers swam before me. Nearly $850,000 gone. Our entire retirement, our home equity, everything. I haven't authorized any of that. I know. That's why I'm calling. I think she forged your signatures, Tom. There's one more thing. She tried to make changes to your life insurance policy too. Tried to increase the coverage to $2 million. I fell silent, a chill running through me that had nothing to do with the taxi's blasting air conditioning. I need a lawyer, I said finally. Already called Rachel Wilson. She's waiting for you at your house. And Tom? I also called Calvin. Calvin Matthews was our third musketeer from college days. Now he was a detective with Portland's Financial Crimes Unit. Thank you, I managed, my voice rough. When the taxi pulled into my driveway, my house looked the same from the outside. Tidy landscaping, fresh paint from last summer's project. The Japanese maple Lisa had insisted on planting for our 20th anniversary. Inside was a different story. Rachel and Calvin were waiting on the porch, grim-faced. Rachel stepped forward, giving me a quick hug. I'm so sorry, Tom. Calvin nodded solemnly, his detective's eyes already cataloguing my reaction. The front door was unlocked. I pushed. It opened to find my home gutted. The living room furniture, gone. The dining set my grandfather had left me, gone. The expensive artwork Lisa had insisted we invest in, gone. Even my collection of engineering books and awards, gone. What remained were the heavy appliances, some basic kitchen items, and the guest bedroom furniture. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Everything else had vanished. On the kitchen counter sat a single envelope with my name written in Lisa's elegant handwriting. I picked it up, tore it open, and unfolded a single sheet of stationery, the expensive kind Lisa ordered from a boutique in Seattle. Thomas, by the time you read this, I'll be settled in my new life. I want you to know this isn't sudden. I've been living a double life for 7 years. The conferences in Arizona weren't conferences. Greg isn't just my colleague. We have 2 children together, a 6-year-old daughter and a 4-year-old son. They need their father full-time now, and I need to be with my real family. I've taken what I consider my fair share for all the years I've waited. Please don't try to find me. It will only embarrass us both. Lisa. I handed the letter to Calvin without a word, then walked through the house in a daze, cataloguing what was missing. Our wedding photos gone. Not that they mattered now. My father's watch gone. That mattered. My collection of rare first edition engineering texts gone. My own childhood photos and mementos gone. 7 years, I said finally, returning to the kitchen where Calvin and Rachel were reading the letter. She's been living a double life for 7 years. Rachel looked up, her lawyer's mind already working. This actually helps us. It's an admission of fraud and bigamy. Calvin nodded. I've already pulled her credit card statements for the past 5 years as part of the initial fraud investigation. We'll trace her movements, find this Greg person, locate the kids. Bigamy is a felony. So is forgery. I sank into one of the remaining kitchen chairs, suddenly exhausted. She has children, other children. The reality of it struck me like a physical blow. Lisa and I had decided not to have kids early in our marriage. She'd said she didn't want them, and I'd eventually made peace with that, throwing myself into my work instead, all while she was building another family elsewhere. I need to secure what's left, I said finally, looking up at Rachel. And then I need to access my safety net. Rachel raised an eyebrow. Safety net? I managed a grim smile. Lisa doesn't know everything about me either. That night, after Calvin left and Rachel helped me secure new locks on all the doors, I sat in my half-empty house with a legal pad making lists. Things taken, accounts compromised, steps needed. Alan arrived around midnight with Chinese takeout and his laptop. "You ready to activate Protocol Sierra?" he asked, as he unpacked containers of food I had no appetite for. I nodded. Back in my early 40s, I'd watched a colleague lose everything in a brutal divorce. His wife had taken their savings, their house, even his retirement accounts. He ended up living in a studio apartment at age 60, starting over from nothing. The experience had terrified me. So Alan and I had created Protocol Sierra, named after the mountain range where I'd proposed to Lisa, a financial safety net that she knew nothing about. I'd been diverting 30% of my income for the past 12 years into a complex web of investments, LLCs, and offshore accounts. All legal, all declared on my taxes, but structured in a way that kept them separate from our marital assets. The foundation was a consulting company I'd established in the Cayman Islands, which contracted my services to the main firms that hired me. My work in 23 different countries over the years made this arrangement seem perfectly normal to any casual observer. The Cayman company paid me a smaller salary, which went to our joint accounts, while retaining the rest as corporate profits, which were then invested through various vehicles. "What's the current total?" I asked Alan, as he pulled up the secure server. "Just over $1 million, he said, plus the vacation property in Colorado that's owned by the Montana LLC. I exhaled slowly. Lisa had taken nearly everything she knew about, but she'd still left me with more than she'd stolen. "I want to move carefully," I told Alan. "If she realizes I have these resources, she might come back for more." Alan nodded, already typing. "I'll start the process of separating everything that's left in your name from anything joint. And I've got Calvin running background on this Greg person. I want to find her," I said, surprising myself with the calm in my voice. "Not for reconciliation, for justice." The next morning, I met with the bank manager at our local branch. As suspected, Lisa had indeed forged my signature on multiple documents. The bank froze what remained of our joint accounts pending investigation and promised to provide all records to Calvin for the criminal case. Rachel accompanied me to the courthouse, where we filed emergency motions to freeze any assets in Lisa's name and to invalidate the home equity line of credit based on fraud. "The credit card companies will fight you," Rachel warned as we left the courthouse. "They'll claim you should have noticed the cards being opened in your name." "I was in northern Canada for 6 months," I replied. "No regular mail delivery, spotty internet. Lisa managed all our finances for years. That's how she knew exactly how to do this." 3 days into this nightmare, Calvin called with news. "We found Greg Pearson," he said, "investment advisor, in Scottsdale, Arizona. Divorced his first wife 8 years ago, has been seen with Lisa regularly over the past 7 years. And yes, there are 2 children who appear to be his and Lisa's, Sophie, age 6, and Ethan, age 4. My stomach clenched at the names. We'd once discussed naming our daughter Sophie if we ever had children. "Where are they now?" I asked. "They purchased a house in Scottsdale 3 weeks ago. $2 million, paid $600,000 down, mortgaged the rest." That explained some of the missing money. "I've contacted the Scottsdale PD," Calvin continued. "They're building a case. Bigamy, fraud, identity theft. They'll handle the Arizona end. We'll handle the Oregon charges. But Tom, there's something else." I braced myself. "What?" Greg Pearson has a history. This isn't his first rodeo. His first wife reported similar behavior, cleaned out their accounts before disappearing. No charges were filed then. But I did some digging. There's a pattern. 3 relationships over the past 15 years. Each time, he targets a woman with significant assets, convinces her to liquidate everything, then vanishes. He's been questioned in connection with financial crimes twice, but never charged. And Lisa, is she a victim too? Calvin hesitated. The evidence suggests she's a willing participant this time. The account transfers were made by her. She signed the documents. And well, the children make it clear this isn't new. I hung up and stared out the window of my half-empty house. The Japanese maple was showing its first spring buds. Lisa had loved that tree. A week passed in a blur of legal meetings, bank investigations, and sleepless nights. I formally activated Protocol Sierra, moving assets into more accessible accounts. I filed for divorce, citing fraud and adultery, with Rachel handling the paperwork. Then came an unexpected breakthrough. Eleanor, my neighbor, called one morning. "Tom, I was going through some old photos on my phone, and I found something from last year's block party. It has Lisa in the background talking to a man. I think it might be the same one from the moving truck." She sent the photo, and sure enough, there was Lisa laughing with a tall, silver-haired man in an expensive-looking polo shirt. Greg Pearson, standing on my street at my neighborhood block party, talking to my wife. The rage I'd been suppressing finally boiled over. I forwarded the photo to Calvin and Rachel, then did something impulsive. I booked a flight to Scottsdale. "This is a bad idea," Rachel warned when I told her my plan. "Let the legal process work." But I needed to see for myself. Needed to look Lisa in the eye, to understand how 22 years of marriage could have been a fabrication. I arrived in Scottsdale on a brutally hot afternoon. Calvin had given me the address of the house Lisa and Greg had purchased, a sprawling Spanish-style mansion in a gated community. I rented a car and drove past the house twice, not sure what I was looking for. On the third pass, I saw a familiar vehicle in the driveway, Lisa's silver Mercedes SUV, which had disappeared from our garage along with everything else. I parked down the street and called Calvin. "I'm outside their house," I said without preamble. "Jesus, Tom, don't approach them. We're coordinating with Scottsdale PD for arrests next week. Don't mess this up. I just need to see." "See what?" Calvin demanded. "If she looks happy," I admitted. "If it was all a lie." Calvin sighed. "Look, I'm texting you the name of a detective in Scottsdale. Call him. He can accompany you if you insist on this confrontation, but do not go in alone." I agreed and hung up. 2 hours later, I was sitting in Detective Martinez's unmarked car outside the Spanish mansion. "We were planning to execute search warrants next Tuesday," he explained. "But since you're here, and since we have concerns they might flee again, we can accelerate. But you need to understand, this is now a police operation. You're here as an observer only." I nodded mutely as Martinez radioed for backup. Within 30 minutes, 4 police vehicles had quietly assembled on the street. Martinez approached the house with another detective while uniformed officers secured the perimeter. I watched from the car, heart pounding, as Martinez rang the doorbell. Long moments passed before the door swung open, revealing Lisa, my wife, the woman I'd shared my life with for over 2 decades. Even from a distance, I could see the shock register on her face when Martinez showed his badge. She stepped back, saying something I couldn't hear, as the officers entered the house. Martinez had instructed me to stay in the car, but when I saw Greg Pearson being led out in handcuffs 20 minutes later, I couldn't help myself. I stepped out, standing by the car, directly in Pearson's line of sight. His eyes met mine briefly, showing no recognition. Why would they? He'd never met me, despite destroying my life. Then Lisa emerged, also handcuffed, escorted by a female officer. She looked up and saw me standing there, the color drained from her face. "Thomas," she gasped. I said nothing, just held her gaze as officers guided her toward a patrol car. "Thomas, please," she called out. "It's not what you think. I can explain. Everything." Still, I remained silent. 22 years of marriage, and I had nothing left to say. What happened next caught everyone by surprise. A minivan pulled into the driveway, a woman driving, with 2 small children in the back seat. The woman parked and hurried out, looking confused and alarmed at the police presence. "Greg, what's happening?" she called out. Pearson's head snapped. Melissa, take the kids and go, now." Detective Martinez stepped forward. "Ma'am, are you Melissa Pearson?" The woman nodded, clutching her purse. "Yes, I'm Greg's wife. What's going on?" The silence that followed was deafening. Lisa stared at the woman, then at Greg, her expression shifting from confusion to horror. It turned out Greg Pearson had not one, but 2 secret families. The Arizona police would later discover a third in Nevada. He had been playing an elaborate shell game, moving money between multiple women, multiple households, multiple lives. And Lisa, my Lisa, had been just another mark. The court proceedings that followed were complicated but decisive. Lisa was charged with multiple felonies, including forgery, identity theft, and fraud. Greg Pearson faced even more serious charges across 3 states. Their assets were frozen, including the Scottsdale house and all accounts. The hardest part wasn't the legal battles. It was sitting in the courtroom during Lisa's arraignment, watching her transformed from my confident, elegant wife into a diminished figure in an orange jumpsuit, avoiding my eyes. During a break in proceedings, her court-appointed attorney approached me. "Mr. Reed, my client would like to speak with you privately." "Why would I agree to that?" I asked. "She says she can tell you where some of your personal items are. Things of sentimental value." That was how I found myself sitting across from Lisa in a small conference room, a guard by the door. Up close, she looked older. The confident veneer cracked to reveal someone I barely recognized. "Thomas," she began, her voice smaller than I remembered. "I never meant for this to happen." I said nothing. "Greg. He has a way of making you believe things, making you think you're special, making you think there's this amazing future just waiting." I finally spoke. 7 years, Lisa. 2 children. She looked down at her hands. "I met him at a seminar. You were in Brazil for that damn project. He was charming, attentive. Everything started small. Lunch, discussions about investments, then more. When I found out I was pregnant, he convinced me we could have both lives, that you'd never need to know. And the money? My father's watch? My childhood photos? Were those part of your special future too?" Tears spilled down her cheeks. "He said we needed to liquidate everything, that there was an investment opportunity that would triple our money in 2 years. I believed him, but last month I found receipts for jewelry I never received, hotel charges in Las Vegas when he was supposed to be at conferences. I started asking questions, and he got angry, said I needed to prove my commitment by bringing everything I could. So you cleaned out our life. I thought we were building something together. Then 3 days ago I found his phone unlocked, saw messages to someone named Melissa about their anniversary dinner. When I confronted him, he laughed, said I should be grateful he gave me the good years. I stood up. My watch, my photos. Where are they? Storage unit in Tempe, unit 247. The key is in my jewelry box at the house. The Scottsdale police have it now. I turned to leave. "Thomas," she called after me, "I know it's meaningless, but I'm sorry. I'll testify against him, help recover what I can." I paused at the door. "You traded 22 years for a conman's. Promises, that's the part I'll never understand." The recovery process was slow but thorough. Between the criminal restitution process and civil judgments, I eventually recovered about 60% of what had been taken. Lisa and Greg both received prison sentences, 5 years for her, 12 for him. The storage unit in Tempe did indeed contain my father's watch, my childhood photos, and surprisingly, most of the first edition engineering books I'd collected. These personal items meant more to me than the money ever could. 6 months after Lisa's arrest, I stood on the deck of a small but elegant cabin in the Colorado Rockies, the property owned by my Montana LLC that Lisa had never known about. The autumn leaves were turning gold against the evergreens, the mountains standing sentinel in the background. Alan sat in an Adirondack chair beside me, beer in hand. "So what now?" he asked. "Back to dams and bridges in remote locations?" I shook my head. "Actually, I've accepted a teaching position at Colorado State Engineering Department, starting next semester." He looked surprised. "Teaching? That's not what I expected. I've spent my career building structures in faraway places, helping other communities while my own life crumbled without me noticing. Time for a change." My phone buzzed with a text from Rachel, my attorney. "Final divorce decree signed today. You're officially free." I showed the message to Alan. "To new beginnings," he said, raising his beer, "and to Protocol Sierra." I added with a small smile, "The safety net Lisa never knew about." The lesson I learned wasn't about trust or betrayal, though those were part of it. It was about balance. About building a life as carefully as I'd built massive infrastructure projects, about being present for my own story. I sold the Portland house, transferred my remaining assets to simpler, more transparent accounts. The $1 million from Protocol Sierra, combined with the partial recovery of stolen funds, left me with enough to live comfortably while starting a new chapter. Sometimes I wonder about those children in Arizona, Sophie and Ethan, innocent participants in their parents' deception. I've established anonymous college funds for both of them. They shouldn't suffer for the sins of their parents. Lisa writes occasionally from prison. I read the letters but don't respond. There's nothing left to say. The future stretches before me now. Classes to teach, mountains to hike, perhaps even new relationships to explore. But this time, I'm building my life with the same care and attention I once reserved for bridges and dams. Solid foundations, transparent structures, regular maintenance, and yes, still a safety net. Because while I'm ready to trust again someday, I'll never again put my entire life in someone else's hands. The first time I met Lisa Winters was at a charity fundraiser for sustainable infrastructure in developing nations. It was March 2001, and I was fresh off a 2-year project building irrigation systems in rural Ethiopia. At 33, I was already making a name for myself in engineering circles, particularly for finding cost-effective solutions in challenging environments. Lisa stood by a display of photographs I donated for the silent auction, stark, black-and-white images of Ethiopian landscapes and the concrete channels that now brought water to formerly barren fields. She was studying a particular photo of an elderly woman touching flowing water for the first time in her village. "Did you take this?" she asked without turning around. "I did," I replied, swirling my mediocre white wine in a plastic cup. 2 years of my life in those pictures. She turned then, and I remember thinking her eyes matched the cobalt blue of her simple dress. Professional, elegant, but not ostentatious. Her dark hair was pulled back in a neat bun, a few strands framing her face. "Lisa Winters," she said, extending her hand. "Development coordinator for the foundation." "Thomas Reed," I replied, taking her hand. "The engineer who can't seem to stay in one place for more than a few months." She laughed, a genuine sound that seemed to rise from somewhere authentic. "Oh, so you're the nomadic builder everyone's been talking about." We spoke for over an hour that night. Lisa was intelligent, articulate, passionate about sustainable development. She'd been working for the Portland Environmental Foundation for 3 years after leaving a corporate job that she claimed had slowly drained her soul. "I wanted to do something that mattered," she explained, "something that would leave the world better than I found it." Those words resonated with me. They became, in many ways, the foundation of our relationship, this shared belief in creating something meaningful, something lasting. We married 11 months later in a small ceremony alongside the Columbia River. I'd just returned from a 6-month project in Malaysia and had 3 months before heading to Brazil. Lisa seemed to understand. The nature of my work even embraced it. "We'll have the best of both worlds," she said on our honeymoon in British Columbia. "You'll have your adventures, building incredible things around the world. I'll have my work with the foundation, and we'll have our time together. More intense, more precious, because it's limited." Those early years were good. Better than good. The rhythm of my departures and returns created a cycle of renewal in our relationship. Each reunion felt like falling in love again. When I was home, we'd travel locally, hike the Cascades, spend weekends exploring the Oregon coast. Lisa would show me the Foundation's latest projects, the communities they were helping. When I was away, we'd write long emails, have weekly video calls. This was before smartphones made constant connection easy, when communication required intention, purpose. Perhaps that's partly why I didn't see the changes happening. Our communications were scheduled, prepared for, performances of a sort. Around our 5th anniversary, Lisa left the foundation to start her own environmental consulting business. She'd made connections, built expertise, and wanted more autonomy. I supported her completely, even used some of my international contacts to help her establish clients. "This will give me more flexibility when you're home," she reasoned, "and more interesting work when you're away." By our 7th anniversary, her business was thriving. She had 2 employees, a downtown office, and clients across the Pacific Northwest. My career was similarly ascending, larger projects, higher profile work, better compensation. We bought our Portland house that year, a beautiful craftsman-style home in the Irvington neighborhood with character and history and plenty of space for both of us to have home offices. We discussed children once, sitting on the back deck of our new home, watching summer stars appear. "I've never felt that maternal pull," Lisa admitted, her voice soft but certain. "I love our life, our freedom. Is that something you need?" I considered it carefully before answering. "I've always imagined myself as a father someday, but I'm gone so much. It wouldn't be fair to leave you with all the responsibility. So we'd be choosing between your career and having children?" "Not necessarily. I could look for more local work, teaching positions perhaps." She reached for my hand then, held it tightly. "I love your passion for your work. I wouldn't want you to resent children for taking that away. And honestly, I'm not sure I want to change what we have." The conversation ended there. We never explicitly decided against having a family. It just became an assumed path we wouldn't take. At the time, it felt like a mutual decision born of practical considerations and personal preferences. Looking back, I wonder if Lisa already knew she wanted a different kind of family, just not with me. Our 10th anniversary coincided with the completion of a major bridge project in Vietnam. I flew Lisa out for the ribbon-cutting ceremony, and we spent 2 weeks traveling through Southeast Asia afterward. She seemed happy, engaged, taking hundreds of photographs and buying small artifacts for our home. We made love in luxury hotels and rustic bungalows alike, talked about future adventures, planned renovations to the Portland house. In hindsight, there were small changes beginning around year 12. Lisa started traveling more for her consulting business. Sustainability, conferences, client meetings, industry events. Most were in the Pacific Northwest, but increasingly she mentioned trips to the Southwest, Arizona, Nevada, New Mexico, expanding her business territory, she explained. The desert has unique environmental challenges, she told me. And there's money there, lots of development happening that needs to be sustainable. I believed her, why wouldn't I? Her business continued to grow. Our financial situation improved steadily. We were building toward early retirement, toward a time when my international work would end and we could enjoy the fruits of our labor. When I think back now, trying to identify when things first became truly suspicious, I remember a particular evening during my home rotation about 5 years ago. I'd been back from a project in Peru for 3 weeks, with another month before heading to Taiwan. Lisa had just returned from what she described as an intensive 3-day sustainability conference in Phoenix. She was unpacking in our bedroom while I prepared dinner, a skill I'd cultivated over years of living in remote locations with limited food options. I brought her a glass of wine and noticed something unusual on the bedside table. A child's drawing. Colorful crayon marks depicted what looked like 3 stick figures with "For Mommy" scrawled across the top in wobbly letters. "What's this?" I asked, picking up the paper. Lisa glanced over, and for a split second, something flashed across her face. Alarm? Fear? But it disappeared so quickly I thought I'd imagined it. "Oh, that's from my client's daughter," she said smoothly, taking the drawing from my hand. "Cute, isn't it? She was at the office when I stopped by yesterday, drawing pictures while her mum and I worked. She made one for each of us." I nodded, accepting the explanation. Yet something about the moment lingered. The brief flash in her eyes, the quickness of her response, the way she tucked the drawing into her briefcase rather than displaying it somewhere. Later that evening, as we ate dinner on the back deck, Lisa mentioned she'd need to return to Phoenix the following month. "Another conference?" I asked. "Client follow-up," she replied. "The developer I told you about, the one building the eco-friendly housing community, they need more comprehensive assessments before breaking ground." "Sounds interesting. Maybe I could join you. I've got 3 more weeks before Taiwan." Again, that momentary hesitation. "It would be terribly boring for you," she said. "All technical meetings and site surveys in the desert heat. And I'll be working 12-hour days. Why waste your free time?" It made sense. We'd long ago established that mixing our professional lives wasn't always productive. I enjoyed my time at home, reconnecting with friends, working on the house, planning future travels. Still, something felt off in a way I couldn't articulate. That night, I woke around 3 a.m. to find Lisa's side of the bed empty. I found her in the kitchen, laptop open, phone in hand. She was speaking softly, her back to me. "I miss you too, sweetie. Yes, I'll be there soon. Be good for Daddy, okay? Mommy loves you very much." She ended the call as I entered the kitchen, closing her laptop with a snap. "Everything okay?" I asked, genuinely concerned. "Just work," she said, not quite meeting my eyes. "The development project is having some permit issues. Needed to reassure the client at 3 a.m. They're panicking about deadlines. You know how it is." I did know how it was in my industry. Emergencies happened, clients panicked, middle-of-the-night calls were sometimes necessary. So I accepted her explanation, offered to make her tea, kissed her forehead when she declined. "Come back to bed soon," I said. "You need rest." She nodded, but when I woke at 7 a.m., she was asleep in the guest room, claiming she hadn't wanted to disturb me when she finally came to bed. Now, of course, I understand what I heard that night. I was listening to my wife comforting her other child, the child she had with another man, the child whose existence she had hidden from me for years. The pieces were there, but I couldn't or wouldn't assemble them into the devastating picture they formed. The pattern continued and evolved over the next few years. Lisa's business trips to the Southwest became more frequent. 2 days, 3 days, sometimes a week, always with legitimate-sounding professional reasons. always with evidence. Client. Emails she would forward to me. Photographs of landscapes being assessed, sustainability reports with her company logo. She was meticulous in constructing her parallel life, careful to maintain the foundation of trust we'd built over decades. And I was the perfect mark, often absent for months at a time, naturally trusting, focused on my own career challenges. Around our 17th anniversary, the warning signs became harder to ignore. Lisa began declining to join me on certain international trips, something she'd always been eager to do before. "The business needs me here," she'd say, or "the timing just doesn't work with my client's schedule." Our video calls during my deployments grew shorter, more perfunctory. She seemed distracted, checking her watch, glancing off camera. When I asked about her day, her answers became vaguer, less detailed. The usual, she might say: client meetings, proposals, administrative headaches. When I was home, I noticed other changes: new clothes with unfamiliar styles, a different perfume, more frequent salon appointments, a sudden interest in fitness that had her joining a gym and working with a personal trainer. "Just taking care of myself," she explained. When I commented, "We're not getting any younger." All normal midlife adjustments, I told myself. We were in our early 50s. People change, evolve, develop new interests. The foundation of our marriage remained strong: our financial partnership, our intellectual connection, our shared values and goals. Or so I believed. 3 years ago, I took a teaching position at Portland State for 1 semester between major projects. It seemed like an opportunity to spend more time at home, to reconnect. Lisa seemed supportive, but strangely anxious about the change in routine. "Won't you be bored?" she asked. "Teaching undergraduates about basic engineering principles?" "It might be refreshing," I replied, "shaping young minds instead of concrete for a change." The semester revealed new fissures in our relationship. With my more regular schedule, I noticed how often Lisa wasn't where she claimed she would be. The conference call that I returned home early from class to find wasn't happening. The client dinner that the client later mentioned had been cancelled weeks before. The weekend workshop that left no digital footprint despite Lisa's tech-savvy business practices. I began to suspect an affair, the most obvious explanation. But when I tried to discuss my concerns, Lisa was masterful at making me feel unreasonable, paranoid even. "You've spent too many years in isolated work camps," she said during one confrontation. "You've forgotten how normal business networking functions. Not everything happens on a strict schedule or generates paperwork." And because I wanted to believe her, because I couldn't imagine the extent of her deception, I accepted these explanations. I returned to international work, taking a 2-year project constructing water treatment facilities in Bangladesh. Distance made it easier to ignore the inconsistencies, to accept the increasingly implausible explanations. Our 20th anniversary passed with limited celebration, a weekend in Seattle when I was home between project phases. Lisa seemed preoccupied, checking her phone frequently, making excuses to step away for calls. "Environmental crisis with a client project," she explained. "Contamination discovered at a building site. Could mean major liability issues." I nodded, pretending to believe her, just as she pretended to be fully present at our anniversary. Dinner. We had become actors in our own marriage, performing roles that had once been genuine. The last 2 years brought more projects for me, the dam in northern Canada being the most recent and longest. 6 months in near isolation, with limited internet and phone service. The perfect scenario for Lisa to execute her final plan. Looking back at these 22 years, I can see the careful progression of Lisa's deception. The foundation was laid in those early years when trust was built. The structure rose gradually, almost imperceptibly. Small lies becoming larger ones, absences expanding, explanations growing more complex. And finally, the extraction began. systematic, methodical removal of our financial resources. I've spent hours wondering when she first met Greg Pearson. Was it truly at a financial seminar 7 years ago, as she claimed in that prison conference room? Or was it earlier? Had she been planning this longer than even she admitted? And the children, Sophie and Ethan, 6 and 4 years old, conceived and born while Lisa was still coming home to me, still sharing my bed, still planning our future together? How had she managed such complete compartmentalization? How had she separated these two lives so thoroughly? Most painful, perhaps, is recognizing that while I was building infrastructure to improve lives across the world, I failed to notice the infrastructure of my own life being systematically dismantled. The engineer who specialized in structural integrity had missed the critical failings in his own foundation. A month after my return from Canada, while Lisa was awaiting trial, I finally gathered the courage to visit her office in downtown Portland. Her 2 employees, Karen and Michelle, had been questioned by the police but were not implicated in any wrongdoing. They were as shocked as I was, perhaps more so given their daily proximity. The office was modest but professional. 3 rooms, in a converted industrial building. Lisa's private office had a view of the Willamette River and the downtown skyline beyond. It looked exactly as I would have expected. Certificates on the walls, sustainability awards on shelves, photos of environmental projects. And yet, as Karen gave me a tour, I noticed something odd. The photos were all from the Pacific Northwest, none from Arizona or Nevada or New Mexico. No evidence of the southwestern clients Lisa had mentioned so frequently. Did Lisa do much work in Arizona? I asked casually. Karen looked surprised. Arizona? Not that I'm aware of. Our client base is almost exclusively Oregon and Washington, with a few projects in Northern California. She traveled there frequently, I said. For client meetings, conferences. Karen and Michelle exchanged glances. Mr. Reed, Michelle said gently. Lisa did travel frequently, but she handled those trips personally. They weren't on the company calendar, and we never prepared materials for Southwestern clients. The realization hit me then. Lisa's environmental consulting business was real, legitimate, and successful, but it had also served as the perfect cover for her other life. The business trips, the conferences, the client emergencies, some were genuine, others complete fabrications. As I left the office that day, carrying a box of Lisa's personal effects that the employees had collected for me, Karen stopped me at the door. Mr. Reed, she said hesitantly, I don't know if this helps, but Lisa was always so proud when she talked about you, about the work you did around the world. She kept a map in her desk drawer with pins marking all your projects, called it her Thomas map. She would update it whenever you went somewhere new. I nodded, unable to speak past the lump in my throat. I can't reconcile the Lisa we knew with what happened. Karen continued. It's like there were 2 different people. Yes, I managed. That's exactly what it was. The box sat unopened in my half-empty house for weeks. I couldn't bring myself to look through it, to see more evidence of Lisa's double life. When I finally did, I found the Thomas map Karen had mentioned, a large world map with dozens of colored pins marking my projects across 6 continents. Notes in Lisa's handwriting filled the margins. Thomas's bridge that survived the 2011 earthquake, water treatment facility serving 50,000 people, dam providing electricity to remote villages. She had tracked my career with meticulous attention, had taken genuine pride in my work, and yet simultaneously she had been building a separate life that would ultimately destroy everything we had created together. At the bottom of the box was a sealed envelope with my name on it. Inside was a single sheet of paper, a handwritten letter. Thomas, if you're reading this, everything has fallen apart. I've made choices I can't explain or justify, even to myself. I want you to know that what we had was real. My love for you, my pride in your work, my commitment to our early years together, none of that was fabricated. What changed wasn't my feelings for you, but something restless inside me, something that Greg recognized and exploited. He made me believe I could have everything, you, him, a family, success, without consequences. By the time I realized the impossibility of that fantasy, I was too deep in the deception to find a way out. I won't ask for forgiveness. I don't deserve it. But please know that in my distorted thinking, I believed we would both end up better off. You with your work that changes the world, me with the family I realized too late that I wanted. I was wrong, catastrophically wrong, and now we're both paying the price. Lisa. I read the letter once, then set it aflame in the fireplace, watching the paper curl and blacken until nothing remained but ash. Her explanations, her justifications, they changed nothing. 22 years reduced to cinders. That night, I opened the safe hidden behind a false panel in my home office, a secure storage Lisa had never known about. Inside was documentation of Protocol Sierra, the financial safety net Alan and I had established years earlier. Multiple folders labeled with investment accounts, property deeds, corporate registrations, statements showing steady growth over 12 years of deposits and reinvestment. I hadn't created Protocol Sierra because I expected betrayal specifically from Lisa. I'd created it because I'd seen how quickly a life's work could be dismantled, how vulnerable success could be. It was insurance against catastrophe, a structural reinforcement in the architecture of my financial life, and now it was the foundation upon which I would rebuild. 3 days later, I flew to Colorado to inspect the mountain property I'd purchased through the Montana LLC. It was smaller than our Portland house, but more thoughtfully designed, an A-frame structure with walls of glass facing the mountains, a wraparound deck, and a detached studio that could serve as a home office. The nearest town was 20 minutes away, small but with the essentials. The closest city, about an hour's drive, housed a respected university where teaching positions occasionally opened. Standing on the deck that first evening, watching golden light fade from distant peaks, I felt something unexpected. Peace. Not happiness, not yet, but a quieting of the chaos that had defined the past months. My phone rang, Alan checking in as he did daily during this period. "How's the mountain hideaway?" he asked. "It's good," I replied. "Sturdy, well built, like it was waiting for this moment." "How are you holding up?" I considered the question. "Honestly, I'm standing. That's something." "The DA called today. They've traced about 60% of the missing money. The house in Scottsdale has been seized. They'll liquidate assets for restitution. And the children?" Alan hesitated. "Greg's sister has taken them temporarily. Social services is involved." I nodded, though he couldn't see me. Those children, innocent participants in their parents' elaborate deception, weighed on me in ways I hadn't anticipated. They had never asked to be born into such complicated circumstances, never chosen to be the biological manifestation of betrayal. "I've been thinking," I said slowly, "about establishing trust funds for them, anonymous ones, for education eventually." Alan was silent for a moment. "That's incredibly generous given the circumstances. They're children, Alan. Whatever else happened, they shouldn't suffer for their parents' choices." After we hung up, I sat on the deck until stars appeared, thinking about foundations and structures, about what endures and what collapses, about how we build our lives and what happens when the blueprint we're following turns out to be falsified. The engineering principles I'd applied throughout my career suddenly seemed relevant in this personal catastrophe. Assess the damage honestly. Salvage what can be saved. Clear away what cannot. Rebuild on sounder principles with better materials, incorporating lessons from the failure. I would need time Time to process the betrayal, to understand my own blindness, to rebuild trust in my judgment. But time was now something I had in abundance. For the first time in decades, I had no project deadline looming, no remote location awaiting my expertise. Just mountains and sky, and the task of reconstructing a life that had been expertly dismantled by the person I had trusted most in the world. The investigation into Lisa and Greg's financial schemes took unexpected turns in the weeks following their arrests. Detective Martinez from Scottsdale called me regularly with updates, each more surprising than the last. "We've identified at least 7 bank accounts across 4 states," he explained, during one particularly lengthy call. "The money trail is complex, designed to be difficult to follow." I sat at the kitchen counter of my Colorado cabin, notepad in hand, documenting every detail. My engineering mind needed the precision of facts, the solidity of numbers, to process the abstract pain of betrayal. "And Greg's background?" I asked. "That's where it gets really interesting," Martinez replied, his voice taking on the energized tone detectives get when describing a particularly elaborate crime. Gregory Pearson isn't his birth name. He was born Gary Prentice in Albuquerque, changed his name legally 20 years ago after his first fraud conviction. He has a pattern spanning decades, usually financial fraud, investment scams, but with an interesting specialization in what we call relationship-facilitated fraud, meaning he targets women with assets or income, establishes romantic relationships, then systematically drains their resources. Usually moves on before charges are filed. Most victims are too embarrassed to pursue it. I absorbed this information, wondering how Lisa, intelligent, perceptive Lisa, had fallen for such a scheme. Had her desire for a different life, for the children we never had, made her vulnerable? Or had she been an active participant from the beginning? "And the children," I asked, "are they really his?" Martinez hesitated. "DNA confirms he's the biological father of both kids. They're currently with his sister in Phoenix, as I mentioned before. Child Services is monitoring the situation closely." After the call, I walked out to the deck, letting the crisp mountain air clear my head. The revelation that Greg Pearson was a career con man provided a narrative that was almost comforting, Lisa as victim rather than mastermind. Yet the complexity of the financial arrangements, the years of meticulous deception, suggested more active participation than simple manipulation. The truth, I suspected, lay somewhere in the uncomfortable middle. Lisa had made choices, hundreds of them over years, that prioritized her parallel life over our marriage. Whether influenced by Greg's manipulations or driven by her own desires, those choices were hers. 2 days later, Rachel called with news about the civil proceedings. "The judge has granted the emergency freeze on all identified assets," she explained. "The forensic accountants have traced about $620,000 so far." "Out of $850,000, I noted. "Where's the rest?" "That's the challenge. Some was spent. The down payment on the Scottsdale house accounts for about $200,000. There were expensive purchases, jewelry, artwork, designer furniture, and substantial cash withdrawals that are harder to track." "What's the timeline for recovery?" "The Scottsdale house will be sold as soon as the court approves it, probably within 2 months. The bank accounts could be released to you within weeks once the investigation confirms the funds were fraudulently obtained. The physical assets are more complicated. They'll need to be inventoried, appraised, and auctioned." I thanked Rachel for her work, ended the call, and returned to the detailed spreadsheet I'd been creating. On one side, assets lost. On the other, assets secured through Protocol Sierra. The final tally was sobering, but not devastating. Even if I recovered nothing from Lisa and Greg's scheme, I had enough to live comfortably, particularly in this less expensive mountain community. The practical assessment brought a certain clarity. The financial damage was quantifiable, manageable. The emotional damage, that was harder to calculate, impossible to spreadsheet. A week later, I received a call from a Portland number I didn't recognize. "Mr. Reed, this is Dr. Elaine Werner. I'm a psychiatrist working with the Oregon Department of Corrections." My hand tightened around the phone. "You're treating Lisa?" "Yes, she's given written permission for me to contact you. I should clarify that I'm not breaching confidentiality. She's specifically requested that I reach out." "What does she want?" "Doctor." Werner's voice remained professionally neutral. "She's been diagnosed with a condition we call dualistic personality integration disorder. It's not multiple personality disorder in the clinical sense, but rather a psychological compartmentalization that allows individuals to maintain separate, contradictory life narratives." "You're saying she has two personalities?" "Not exactly. It's more that she developed the capacity to maintain two distinct life narratives without allowing them to intersect in her conscious processing. Think of it as extreme compartmentalization rather than distinct personalities." I paced the length of my cabin's main room, trying to process this information. Is this her way of avoiding responsibility, claiming mental illness? "I understand your skepticism, Mr. Reed. To be clear, this condition doesn't absolve her of responsibility. She made conscious choices, but it may help explain how someone could maintain such elaborate parallel lives over years without the typical signs of stress such deception usually creates." "Why are you telling me this? Lisa has requested a meeting with you, not immediately. She recognizes that would be inappropriate given the rawness of the situation, but eventually, when you might be ready. She believes she owes you a more complete explanation than what was possible in that brief courthouse meeting." My initial reaction was refusal. What explanation could possibly matter now? What words could justify or clarify the systematic dismantling of our life together? "I'll consider it," I said finally, "but not soon. I understand. She wanted me to give you this number in case you ever decide you're ready to hear her out." After hanging up, I called Alan. Our friendship had deepened through this crisis, evolving from financial partners to something more akin to brothers. "A psychiatrist," he repeated after I explained the call. "That's a new approach. What do you think?" "I think Lisa is doing what she's always done, trying to control the narrative. Create an explanation that somehow makes this less about deliberate betrayal and more about psychological complexity." "Will you meet with her eventually?" I gazed out the window at the mountains, their solidity a contrast to the shifting uncertainties of human relationships. I don't know. Part of me wants to understand how she could do this. Another part thinks any explanation would just be another manipulation. Alan was silent for a moment. "You know, when my divorce happened, I had 1,000 questions for Rebecca. Why she cheated, when she stopped loving me, whether anything had been real. I never got those answers because I never asked the questions. Sometimes I think that's why it took me so long to move forward." His words stayed with me through the evening as I worked on renovations to the cabin's kitchen, a project I'd undertaken to occupy my hands while my mind processed the continuing revelations. The rhythmic work of measuring, cutting, and installing cabinets provided a meditative counterpoint to the chaos of emotions. 3 weeks after my conversation with Dr. Werner, Calvin called with news that shifted the investigation in yet another direction. "We've been going through Lisa's office computer," he began, "and found something unusual. Emails between her and a woman named Diana Pearson dating back 5 years. Diana Pearson, another wife. Sister. Greg's sister, the one who currently has custody of the children. But here's the interesting part. The emails suggest Diana knew about both you and Melissa from the beginning. She appears to have been actively helping Greg and Lisa maintain their deception. This new information added another layer to the already complex situation. So this is a family operation. Not just Greg, but his sister too. Looks that way. We're investigating her financial ties now. Initial findings suggest she received regular payments from both Greg and Lisa, possibly compensation for her role in the scheme. And she has the children now. Temporarily, this new evidence will almost certainly impact the custody arrangement. Child Services has been informed. After hanging up, I felt a renewed sense of urgency regarding the children. If Diana Pearson was involved in the fraud, what environment were Sophie and Ethan living in? What values were being modeled for them? I called Rachel, my attorney, to discuss the trust funds I'd been considering for the children. Given these new developments, I explained, I want to accelerate the process. Can we establish the trusts in a way that supports the children without benefiting Greg, Lisa, or apparently Diana? Rachel was thoughtful. We could set up educational trusts with strict disbursement conditions, payments made directly to institutions rather than guardians. But Thomas, I have to ask, why are you doing this? These children are the product of your wife's betrayal. It was a fair question, one I'd asked myself repeatedly. They're innocent, I said finally. Whatever Lisa and Greg did, Sophie and Ethan had no choice in the matter, and right now they're losing both parents to prison sentences, and possibly there aren't to criminal charges. They're victims in this too. Rachel promised to draft the trust documents immediately. While her initial question was understandable, her swift action without further questioning reflected why I'd chosen her as my attorney. She respected my decisions once I'd explained my reasoning. The following week brought another unexpected development. Detective Martinez called on a Saturday morning, his voice more animated than usual. Mr. Reed, forensic accounting has uncovered something significant. We've traced a series of transfers from one of Lisa's hidden accounts to another account in the Cayman Islands. The interesting part is the timing. These transfers began 7 years ago, but increased substantially about 4 years ago. Around when their daughter was born, I noted, the timeline aligning with what I now knew about Lisa's second family. Exactly. But here's where it gets complicated. The Cayman account isn't in Greg Pearson's name. It's controlled by an entity called Westview Holdings. My breath caught. And who owns Westview Holdings? That's what took time to uncover. It's a shell company, ultimately controlled by a woman named Eliza Patterson. The name meant nothing to me. Who is she? We're still investigating, but preliminary findings suggest she's another of Greg's romantic partners, lives in Sedona, has a 3-year-old son. I sat down heavily on the nearest chair. He has 3 families? Appears that way. And based on financial records, Lisa has been unknowingly funding this third household through her transfers to what she thought was Greg's personal account. The revelation struck me with unexpected force. Lisa, my Lisa, had been betrayed even as she betrayed me. She had been simultaneously perpetrator and victim, deceiver and deceived. The symmetry held a certain dark irony. Does Lisa know about this? I asked. Not yet. We're building the complete financial picture before presenting it. After the call, I hiked into the mountains behind my cabin, needing physical exertion to process this latest twist. The trail was steep, demanding attention to footing, to breathe, to the immediate reality of placement and balance. For 2 hours, I pushed upward, focused only on the next step, the next rocky outcropping. At the summit, I sat on a sun-warmed boulder and looked out over the valley below. The landscape provided perspective. My personal drama, however life-altering, was small against the backdrop of these ancient mountains. They had witnessed countless human betrayals, heartbreaks, and recoveries. They would witness countless more. I thought about Lisa, stripping our accounts to fund a life with Greg, unknowingly financing his third family in the process. I thought about Greg, masterfully manipulating multiple women, children in 3 different homes calling him father. I thought about the intricate web of deception that had enmeshed all of us, some knowingly, others without awareness. For the first time since discovering Lisa's text message, I felt something unexpected, a faint but definite sense of pity. Not forgiveness, not yet, but recognition of a certain tragic pattern, a sequence of choices and consequences that had damaged everyone involved. When I returned to the cabin, I called Dr. Werner. "I'd like to meet with Lisa," I said when she answered. "Not immediately, but once I've processed this latest information." "May I ask what prompted this decision?" "I've learned that deception went in multiple directions. I have questions only Lisa can answer." The meeting was arranged for the following month to take place at the correctional facility, where Lisa was being held pending trial. In the intervening weeks, the case continued to evolve. Diana Pearson was charged as an accessory to fraud. The Scottsdale house was sold at auction, with proceeds directed toward restitution. Melissa Pearson, Greg's Arizona wife, filed for divorce and entered a cooperation agreement with prosecutors to avoid charges herself. And perhaps most significantly, Eliza Patterson, Greg's third partner, came forward voluntarily after being contacted by investigators. She claimed complete ignorance of Greg's other families, expressing shock and dismay at the revelations. Her financial accounts showed a pattern similar to Lisa's early years, small transfers to accounts controlled by Greg, gradually increasing over time. The day before my scheduled meeting with Lisa, Alan flew to Colorado to offer moral support. We sat on the cabin deck that evening, watching the sunset paint the mountains in shades of amber and gold. "Are you sure about this?" he asked, nursing a beer. "You don't owe her any closure." "It's not about what I owe her," I replied. "It's about what I need to move forward, questions I need answered." "Such as?" I considered the list I'd been mentally compiling for weeks. When the deception became intentional rather than circumstantial, whether any part of our marriage was genuine, how she justified it to herself, whether she ever planned to end things differently. Alan nodded slowly. "Just don't expect satisfying answers. In my experience, people who betray rarely have insight into their own motivations. They construct narratives after the fact to make sense of choices that weren't rational in the moment." "I'm not expecting satisfaction," I said. "Just information, data points to complete the picture." The correctional facility was a modern complex with none of the dramatic intimidation of prisons depicted in films, no towering walls or barbed wire fences, just a series of low institutional buildings surrounded by carefully landscaped grounds. The minimum security women's unit, where Lisa was housed, resembled a community college campus more than a prison. Dr. Werner met me in the visitors area, explaining the protocols and managing my expectations for the meeting. "Lisa has been working intensively on understanding her own behavior," she explained as we walked down a sunlit corridor. "She's under no illusions about the consequences or the possibility of reconciliation. This is about accountability, not manipulation." I nodded, though skepticism remained. Lisa had always been persuasive, articulate in explaining her perspectives. Those same skills that had made her an effective environmental consultant could easily be repurposed for rationalization. The meeting room was small but comfortable, a table with chairs rather than the partitioned phone booths I'd expected. Dr. Werner explained she would be present but would not actively participate unless the conversation became unproductive. When Lisa entered, escorted by a female corrections officer, I was struck by the physical transformation. Always slender, she had lost weight. Her previously immaculate hair hung limp around her face. The designer clothes had been replaced by a beige institutional uniform. Yet her eyes, those cobalt blue eyes that had first drawn me in at the charity fundraiser 24 years earlier, remained the same. "Thomas," she said softly, taking the seat across from me. "Thank you for coming." I nodded, suddenly unsure where to begin, despite the questions I'd been formulating for weeks. "You've heard about Eliza?" Lisa asked, her voice hollow. Yes, I had no idea. All this time, I thought. She trailed off, then steadied herself. "That's not an excuse, just another layer of deception I wasn't aware of." "When did it start?" I asked, finding my voice. "The relationship with Greg, the decision to create another life." Lisa folded her hands on the table, her wedding ring notably absent. "I met him 8 years ago at a genuine financial seminar in Seattle. You were in Colombia, working on the hydroelectric project. He approached me afterward, said he admired my questions during the session. We had coffee, exchanged business cards. Perfectly professional." She paused, collecting her thoughts. "He called a month later when I was in Phoenix for an actual client meeting. Suggested dinner to discuss environmental considerations for developments he was planning. Again, all professional, but there was attention, focus. He made me feel seen in a way I hadn't in years. "I didn't see you." The question emerged sharper than intended. "No, that's not it." Lisa shook her head. "You saw me when you were home. But the absences, 6 months here, 8 months there, the pattern of reconnection and separation, it created a rhythm where I became 2 different people, Lisa with Thomas and Lisa without Thomas. Greg recognized that duality, spoke directly to the Lisa who existed in your absences. That doesn't explain multiple properties, secret children, fraudulent documents. No, it doesn't." She met my gaze directly. "The physical relationship began 7 years ago. I told myself it was just an affair, something to fill the loneliness during your deployments. Then I got pregnant and decided to keep the pregnancy, to have the child you told me you never wanted." Pain flickered across her face. "Yes, it was selfish, inexcusable. Greg convinced me we could manage both lives. You would never need to know. The child would have a father's presence. Everyone's needs would be met." Except that was a lie. Yes, once Sophie was born, everything changed. The compartmentalization became essential rather than convenient. I couldn't bear the thought of losing her, and Greg kept promising that soon we'd have enough saved to create a permanent life together, that I could eventually tell you, end things honorably, transition to a new chapter, while systematically draining our accounts. The financial aspect evolved gradually. First, it was just separate accounts for Sophie's expenses. Then, investments Greg recommended for our future. Then, larger transfers as he described investment, opportunities that would secure everything. I leaned forward, asking the question that had haunted me most. Did you ever love me? Was any of it real? Lisa's eyes filled with tears. Yes, that's what makes this so incomprehensible, even to me. I loved you for years, genuinely, completely. I was proud of your work, treasured our time together, but somehow I developed this capacity to separate those feelings from my other life, like the two existed in parallel universes that never needed to intersect, until they did, until you emptied our accounts and disappeared. The final phase wasn't my idea, she said quietly. Greg became increasingly anxious about you discovering everything, said we needed to secure our future immediately. The complete extraction wasn't part of the original plan. And the life insurance policy, the attempt to increase coverage to $2 million, she paled visibly. That was Greg's initiative. He said it was standard financial planning. I never considered that he might have had plans beyond financial fraud. Lisa looked down at her hands. The investigators showed me the pattern. his previous relationships, the suspicious death of one partner's ex-husband. I've had to accept that I never truly knew who he was. We sat in silence for several moments, the weight of revelations settling between us. "The children," I said finally, "Sophie and Ethan, where will they go now?" "Foster care initially. Greg's sister is being investigated. His parents are deceased. I have a cousin in Minnesota who's considering taking them, but it's complicated by my legal situation." I nodded, not yet sharing my decision regarding the trust funds. That information wasn't relevant to this conversation. "Thomas," Lisa said softly, "I know there's no adequate apology for what I've done. The destruction isn't just financial. It's the history we shared, the trust we built, the future we planned. I've been working with Dr. Werner to understand how I could compartmentalize so completely, maintain such elaborate deceptions while believing I was somehow protecting everyone involved. And have you found an answer? Not a satisfying one. The human capacity for self-deception is apparently limitless. We construct narratives that allow us to continue behaviors that would otherwise be intolerable." It was the most honest statement she'd made, an acknowledgement of the inadequacy of any explanation, the impossibility of rational justification for irrational choices. As our allotted time neared its end, I asked one final question. If you hadn't been caught, if the bank hadn't flagged those large transfers, would you have gone through with it? Disappeared completely with our money and your other family? Lisa's answer came after a long pause. "I told myself I would eventually find a way to end things properly, to explain, to make amends. But the truth is, once you step onto a path of deception, every fork leads to more elaborate lies. I don't know if I would have found my way back to honesty without the intervention of consequences." It wasn't the answer I wanted, but it was perhaps the most truthful one possible. As I stood to leave, Lisa remained seated, making no move to prolong the interaction. "Thank you for coming," she said simply. "I know it doesn't change anything." "No," I agreed, "it doesn't." But as I walked out of the correctional facility into the bright afternoon sunlight, I felt a subtle shift, not forgiveness, not closure, in the traditional sense, but a certain completion of the narrative. The story had been told in full, all participants accounted for, all plot points revealed. The ending wasn't happy. There was no redemption arc, no meaningful reconciliation, just human beings making choices with devastating consequences, leaving others to rebuild from the wreckage. Yet in that completion was a kind of freedom, the freedom to write the next chapter without the weight of unanswered questions, without the burden of incomplete understanding. I drove back to my mountain cabin as evening approached, watching the setting sun cast long shadows across the valley. The light was changing, the season turning toward autumn, new colors emerging on the hillsides. Nature's reminder that transformation continues regardless of human drama. Alan was waiting on the deck, a silent question in his expression as I parked and approached. "Did you get what you needed?" he asked. I considered the question carefully before answering. "I got what was available," I said finally. "The rest I'll have to find elsewhere." The meeting with Lisa marked a turning point. Not in our relationship that was irrevocably severed, but in my approach to rebuilding. The following morning, I woke before dawn and sat on the cabin's deck with a steaming mug of coffee, watching the first hint of sunlight touch the eastern peaks. For the first time since discovering the empty accounts, I felt ready to move forward rather than simply react. Alan found me there an hour later, his own coffee in hand. "You seem different," he observed, settling into the Adirondack chair beside mine. "I'm done looking backward," I replied. "Time to implement the recovery plan rather than just drafting it." He nodded, understanding immediately. Alan had been both witness to and architect of my financial protection strategy. He knew better than anyone the difference between planning and execution. What's first on the agenda? The educational trusts for the children, I said. I want those established, immediately, before any more chaos disrupts their lives. Rachel sent over the draft documents yesterday. I can review them with you this morning. Good. And I've decided to follow through on the Colorado State teaching position. The engineering department chair called again yesterday. They're still interested despite my request to delay the start date. Alan raised an eyebrow. Teaching. That's a significant shift from international infrastructure projects. It is, I agreed. But I've spent decades building things in remote locations. Maybe it's time to build something closer to home. Knowledge, mentorship, community. We spent the morning reviewing the trust documents for Sophie and Ethan. Rachel had structured them elegantly. The funds would be administered by a professional trustee with no connection to Greg or Lisa, with disbursements made directly to educational institutions. Additional funds would become available for living expenses once the children reached college age, but again, with oversight to ensure the money supported their legitimate needs. I had allocated $250,000 for each child, enough to provide educational security without creating the kind of wealth that might distort their development. The trusts were irrevocable and anonymous. The children would never know the source of the funds unless I chose to reveal myself later. By noon, we had finalized the documents. I signed them, feeling a weight lift from my shoulders. Whatever happened with the ongoing legal proceedings, whatever twists the case against Lisa and Greg might take, these two innocent children would have educational opportunities secured. What's next? Alan asked as we prepared lunch in the cabin's newly renovated kitchen. I need to decide about the Portland house, I said, slicing tomatoes for sandwiches. It's been sitting empty for months. The market is strong, and the equity could be better deployed elsewhere. Sell it, Alan advised without hesitation. Too many memories, too many associations. Make a clean break. I nodded, having already reached the same conclusion. The house represented a chapter that had ended more brutally than I could have imagined. Holding on to it served no purpose, except perhaps to maintain a tenuous connection to a life that no longer existed. That afternoon, I called a realtor in Portland whom Eleanor, my former neighbor, had recommended. Susan Chen had specialized in the Irvington neighborhood for 15 years and understood its unique market dynamics. The property has excellent bones, she said, after I described the house. The craftsman details, the updated systems you mentioned, the established landscaping, all highly desirable. Have you considered what price point you're targeting? I named a figure based on recent comparable sales. That's realistic, particularly if you're looking for a relatively quick sale. I could have it listed by next week if you can arrange for someone to grant me access. I'll fly out tomorrow, I decided. Spend a few days packing any remaining personal items, then give you full access. After hanging up, I booked a flight to Portland for the following morning. Alan offered to accompany me, but I declined. This was a journey I needed to make alone, a final farewell to the life I'd shared with Lisa, a necessary step in separating past from future. The Portland I returned to felt simultaneously familiar and foreign, the neighborhoods, the landmarks, the distinctive atmosphere of the city, all unchanged. Yet my relationship to it had fundamentally altered. This was no longer my home, but simply a location where significant events in my life had occurred. Eleanor greeted me with a warm hug when I arrived at the house. "You look better," she said, studying my face. "More settled." "I'm getting there," I replied, appreciating her directness. At 72, Eleanor had navigated her own share of life's upheavals, including the loss of her husband to cancer and a subsequent reinvention. as a community college art instructor. She had collected my mail for months, forwarding important items to Alan's office. Now, she handed me a small stack of envelopes that had arrived in recent days. Mostly junk, she noted, but there's something from the district attorney's office that came yesterday. I opened that envelope first, scanning the formal notification within. The letter informed me that Lisa had accepted a plea agreement. 5 years, with possibility of parole after 3, restitution payments structured over 10 years, and her continued cooperation in the case against Greg Pearson and Diana Pearson. Good news or bad? Eleanor asked, observing my expression. Neither, just information. Lisa took a plea deal. Eleanor nodded, asking no further questions. Instead, she helped me inventory what remained in the house. Furniture I'd need to sell or donate. Kitchen items to be packed or discarded. Clothing still hanging in closets. The process was surprisingly clinical. I had expected emotional landmines, photos I'd forgotten, mementos triggering memories, but found instead a curious detachment. These were simply objects, artifacts from a story that had concluded. By evening, I had filled several boxes with items to keep, family photographs, books with personal significance, the few heirlooms that hadn't disappeared with Lisa. Everything else would be sold with the house or donated to local charities. Eleanor insisted I join her for dinner rather than staying in the half-empty house. Her small bungalow across the street offered a cozy refuge, complete with a sprawling ginger cat named Fitzgerald, who immediately claimed my lap. "What will you do with the Colorado property?" she asked, as we enjoyed her homemade lasagna. "Is that a long-term solution or just a temporary haven?" "I've accepted a teaching position at Colorado State," I explained, "starting next semester, so it seems I'm becoming a mountain dweller for the foreseeable future." "Teaching suits you," she observed. "You have the patience for it, the clarity of thought. Your students will be fortunate. We'll see. It's been decades since I was in a classroom setting." "Some skills don't diminish with time," she said firmly. "Your ability to explain complex concepts, to guide rather than dictate. I've seen you do it with your colleagues when they visited. Those are the qualities of a good teacher." Her confidence bolstered my own. Eleanor had spent 30 years as a high school art teacher before transitioning to community college instruction. She understood the challenges and rewards of education better than most. The following morning, Susan Chen, the realtor, arrived to assess the property. She moved through each room with practiced efficiency, making notes and occasionally asking questions about renovations or systems. "The market for homes with this kind of character and craftsmanship remains strong," she concluded. "We'll stage it minimally, enough furniture to showcase the spaces without creating clutter. Given the current inventory in Irvington, I expect significant interest. How long do you anticipate before closing, assuming we find a buyer quickly?" 30 to 45 days typically, though cash offers could expedite the process. I've had several clients recently who sold their California properties and are looking for exactly this kind of established Portland home. I signed the listing agreement, authorizing Susan to manage the sale process in my absence. With my flight back to Colorado departing that evening, I had just a few hours to complete the sorting and packing. As I worked in what had once been my home office, the doorbell rang. Expecting Eleanor or perhaps Susan returning with additional paperwork, I was surprised to find Calvin, the Portland detective, standing on the porch. "Sorry to drop by unannounced," he said as I invited him in. "Heard from Alan that you were in town briefly." "Just finishing up here," I confirmed, leading him into the kitchen where I offered coffee. "What brings you by? Has something changed with the case?" Calvin accepted the coffee but declined to sit. "Nothing significant with the legal proceedings. Lisa's plea deal is processing as expected. Greg's case is moving toward trial, though his attorney is making noise about a deal as well." "Then why the visit?" He hesitated, uncharacteristic for his usually direct manner. There's been a development with the children, Sophie and Ethan. My hand tightened around my coffee mug. What kind of development? Diana Pearson has been remanded to custody pending her own trial. The children were placed in emergency foster care 3 days ago. The news wasn't entirely unexpected given the investigation into Diana's role in the fraud scheme, but the timing was concerning. Are they together at least? For now, yes, but the system is strained. Finding a placement willing to take 2 children together, particularly in a high-profile case like this, is challenging. I studied Calvin's expression, sensing he hadn't shared his real purpose yet. Why are you telling me this? He set his coffee down carefully. The children's caseworker contacted me. Apparently Sophie has been asking about you. About me? She doesn't even know me. She found a photograph, Calvin explained, in Lisa's personal effects that were released to Diana's house. A picture of you and Lisa from years ago. Sophie recognized her mother, but not you. When she asked, Diana apparently told her you were her mother's real husband. I absorbed this information slowly, and now she's curious. More than curious, she's been asking if she could meet you. The caseworker reached out to see if you'd be willing to have some limited contact. Supervised, of course. Just to answer some of her questions. The request caught me entirely off guard. I'd established the educational trusts from a distance, an anonymous benefactor, ensuring opportunities without entanglement. Direct contact was something else entirely. I don't know if that's appropriate, I said finally. These children are strangers to me, products of a relationship that destroyed my marriage. I understand, Calvin replied, and no one would blame you for maintaining distance. I'm just conveying the request. I walked to the window, looking out at the Japanese maple Lisa had planted. Its leaves were beginning to turn, hinting at the autumn transformation to come. How old did you say Sophie is? 6? Yes. Ethan is 4. Young enough to be confused by the entire situation. Old enough to know something fundamental had changed in their world. What kinds of questions does she have? Calvin shrugged. The caseworker didn't specify, but children in these situations often need to understand the connections between the adults in their lives to make sense of what's happening. I thought about my own childhood, about the sense of security that had come from understanding family relationships, from having a clear narrative about who was who and how we were connected. Sophie and Ethan had lost that clarity, that security, in the most abrupt and confusing way. I'll think about it, I promised. I'm leaving tonight, but I can be reached through Alan if the caseworker wants to discuss parameters. Calvin nodded, seemingly satisfied with this response. That's all anyone could ask. And Thomas, for what it's worth, I think just meeting them once might provide closure for you as well. After he left, I called Alan to discuss this unexpected development. It's entirely your decision, he said after I explained the situation. No one would fault you for keeping your distance. These children represent a profound betrayal. But they're also innocent, I countered. They didn't choose their parentage or circumstances. True, which is why you established the trusts, but direct involvement is different. It creates connections, expectations. A single meeting wouldn't necessarily lead to ongoing involvement, wouldn't it? Alan's skepticism was evident even through the phone. Once you meet them, see them as real children rather than abstract concepts, can you truly walk away without a backward glance? It was a valid question, one I couldn't answer with certainty. The trusts had been straightforward, financial provision without personal entanglement. Meeting Sophie and Ethan would cross a boundary I had carefully established. I need to think about it, I said finally. I'll decide when I'm back in Colorado. The flight home that evening gave me ample time for reflection. As the plane cruised above the clouds, I considered the implications of meeting these children. Would it provide the closure Calvin suggested, or create new complications? Would it help Sophie understand her confusing circumstances, or simply add another adult who would ultimately disappear from her life? I arrived at my mountain cabin late that night, mentally and emotionally exhausted. After arranging the few boxes I'd brought from Portland, I fell into a dreamless sleep, postponing any decision until morning clarity could prevail. The following days brought a welcome return to routine. I hiked daily, continued renovations on the cabin, and began preparing syllabi for the upcoming semester's classes. The structured activity provided space for subconscious processing of the Sophie question, allowing it to settle in my mind without forced resolution. A week after my return to Colorado, Susan Chen called with news of an offer on the Portland house. A couple relocating from San Francisco had toured the property the day after listing and submitted an offer, 5% above asking price, with minimal contingencies and a 30-day closing window. They're motivated buyers, Susan explained. He's starting a position at a tech company's Portland office next month. They've been looking for a character home in an established neighborhood, and yours checks all their boxes. I reviewed the offer that evening, finding no reasonable objections. The terms were favorable, the timeline aligned with my plans, and the price exceeded my expectations. I signed the acceptance documents and returned them to Susan, another chapter officially. Closing. The next morning brought a call from a number I didn't recognize. The woman on the line introduced herself as Meredith Jackson, the caseworker assigned to Sophie and Ethan. "Detective Matthews gave me your number," she explained. "I understand he spoke with you about Sophie's request." "He did," I confirmed. "I've been considering it." "I appreciate that this puts you in an unusual position," Meredith acknowledged. "Many people in your circumstances would want no contact whatsoever. But children in foster care often struggle with understanding their family connections, especially when those connections have been deliberately obscured. What exactly is Sophie asking for? Just to meet me once?" "Essentially, yes. She found a photograph of you with her mother and has been asking questions no one can properly answer. Who you are beyond just her mother's husband. What happened between the adults in her life. She's trying to construct a narrative that makes sense of her current situation. I thought about the developmental psychology courses I'd taken decades earlier during my undergraduate years. Children need coherent narratives to process trauma, to place themselves within a comprehensible world. "If I were to agree," I said carefully, "what would the meeting involve?" "Something very structured and supervised," Meredith assured me. "Perhaps an hour at our family visitation center. I would be present the entire time, along with the children's temporary foster parent." "And what would be expected of me?" "Simple honesty at an age-appropriate level. Sophie doesn't need details about the financial fraud or criminal proceedings. She needs basic information about who the adults in her life are to each other. And perhaps most importantly, reassurance that none of this situation is her fault." Look, that last point resonated. Children often assume responsibility for adult problems, internalizing blame for circumstances they neither created nor controlled. "I'll do it," I decided, the words surprising me even as I spoke them. "But just once. I want to be clear about that from the beginning." "Of course," Meredith agreed readily. "We can schedule it at your convenience. The children are currently placed in Scottsdale, but we could arrange video conferencing if traveling to Arizona is difficult for you." "No, I'll come to them," I replied, instinctively knowing that an in-person meeting would be more meaningful than a digital interaction. "I can fly down next week." After we agreed on a date and time, I called Alan to inform him of my decision. "Are you sure about this?" he asked, concern evident in his voice. "Not entirely," I admitted. But I keep thinking about what it would be like to be 6 years old and have your entire world collapse without explanation. If an hour of my time can provide some clarity for her, it seems like the right thing to do. Just be careful about setting expectations, hers and yours. The boundaries are clear, I assured him. One meeting, supervised, basic information only. Nini. Yet even as I said the words, I recognized their potential inadequacy. Human connections rarely adhere to predetermined limitations, particularly when children are involved. The following Tuesday, I flew to Phoenix and rented a car for the drive to Scottsdale. The desert landscape was starkly beautiful, utterly different from both Portland's lush greenery and Colorado's mountainous terrain. I arrived at the Family Services Center 30 minutes early, using the time to collect my thoughts and prepare mentally for the interaction ahead. Meredith met me in the lobby, a compassionate efficiency in her manner that spoke of years navigating complex family situations. "Thank you for coming," she said, leading me to a consultation room. "I prepared Sophie as best I can, explaining that you knew her mother before she was born, but not going into specific details about the relationships." "What about Ethan? Will he be there too?" "Yes, but primarily because we prefer not to separate the siblings. At 4, he doesn't have the same questions or concerns. He's more focused on immediate circumstances, where he's sleeping, what toys are available, when he'll see his parents again." The consultation room was designed to feel non-institutional. Comfortable furniture, warm colors, a corner with children's books and toys. Meredith indicated a chair for me, then briefly explained how the meeting would proceed. "I'll bring them in with their foster mother, Janelle. She's been with them for just over a week, but is providing excellent care. I'll facilitate introductions, then follow Sophie's lead regarding questions. If anything becomes too detailed or inappropriate for their ages, I'll redirect gently." I nodded, suddenly nervous in a way I hadn't anticipated. What would I see in these children's faces? Lisa's features, Greg's, some combination that would trigger uncomfortable associations. The door opened, and Meredith returned with a middle-aged woman and 2 children. Sophie, the elder, had dark hair pulled back in a neat ponytail, intelligent eyes scanning the room immediately. Ethan stayed closer to Janelle, one hand clutching her pant leg. "Sophie, Ethan, this is Mr. Reed," Meredith said gently. "He knew your mom a long time ago, like we talked about." Sophie studied me openly, her gaze direct and assessing. "You're the man from the picture, with my mom at the waterfall." The photograph she referenced must have been from one of our vacation trips to the Columbia River Gorge, perhaps Multnomah Falls. I nodded, maintaining a calm, open expression despite the surreal quality of the moment. "Yes, that's right. Your mom and I were married for many years." Sophie processed this information, her brow furrowing slightly. "Before she married my dad." I glanced at Meredith, unsure how to navigate this particular complexity. She gave a subtle nod, indicating I should answer truthfully, but simply. "Yes, before she met your dad." A technical truth, if not the complete story. "And you didn't want kids?" Sophie asked, the question catching me off guard with its directness. "It's complicated," I replied carefully. "Sometimes adults make decisions based on many factors, but it wasn't because there was anything wrong with children." Sophie nodded, seemingly satisfied with this answer. "Mum said you built big things, bridges and dams." "That's right. I'm an engineer. I help design and build structures that help communities have clean water or safe transportation." "Like Legos, but bigger?" I smiled despite myself. "Exactly like that. Much bigger Legos that people can actually use." While Sophie continued her methodical questioning, Ethan had gravitated toward the toys in the corner. Occasionally, he would glance over, assessing me with less intensity than his sister, but evident curiosity. "Are you mad at my mom?" Sophie asked suddenly, her voice smaller. The question pierced through my practiced composure. How to answer truthfully without burdening a child with adult complexities. "Your mom and I had some disagreements," I said. "Finally, adults sometimes have problems they can't solve together, but those problems are between the adults. They're not about you or Ethan. But you don't live with her anymore because you're mad." "I don't live with her anymore because adults sometimes need to live separate lives when their relationship changes. But that has nothing to do with you or how anyone feels about you." Sophie considered this, her expression serious beyond her years. "We don't live with Mom or Dad right now either, because they did something wrong and have to stay in a special place." "I know," I said gently, "and that must be very confusing and difficult. Janelle says it's temporary, that eventually things will be more normal again. Janelle's right. This difficult time won't last forever." Sophie looked down at her hands, then back up with renewed determination. "Did you know about us, me and Ethan, before Mom went away?" Another challenging question that required careful navigation. "No, I didn't. I learned about you only recently." "So we were a secret?" Her perception was remarkable for a 6-year-old. "Yes, adults sometimes keep secrets they shouldn't. But that doesn't mean you did anything wrong. You and Ethan are completely innocent in all of this." This seemed to be the reassurance she most needed. Her shoulders relaxed slightly, and she nodded with what appeared to be relief. Our conversation continued for nearly 45 minutes. Sophie asked about where I lived, what Colorado was like, whether I had pets or other family. Simple questions that nonetheless helped her construct a more complete picture of the adults connected to her life. Toward the end of our time, Ethan wandered over from the toy corner and studied me with renewed interest. "Do you like dinosaurs?" he asked abruptly. "I do," I replied, matching his serious tone. "Especially Triceratops." "T-Rex is better," he informed me authoritatively. "They have the biggest teeth." "That's an excellent point." Satisfied with this exchange, he returned to his toys, conversation complete from his perspective. As our scheduled hour drew to a close, Meredith gave a gentle signal that we should begin wrapping up. "Thank you for answering my questions," Sophie said with formal politeness that again seemed beyond her years. "It helps me understand better." "You're welcome," I replied, surprisingly moved by her composure in circumstances that would challenge most adults. "You asked very good questions." As Meredith prepared to lead the children out, Sophie turned back suddenly. "Will I see you again sometime?" The question I had dreaded, the boundary I had determined to maintain clearly. Yet facing this resilient, thoughtful child, my prepared response faltered. "I live pretty far away," I said, neither promising nor refusing outright. "But I'm glad we had this chance to meet." After they left, I remained seated, processing the encounter. These children, particularly Sophie, were not abstract concepts or merely symbols of betrayal. They were distinct individuals navigating a confusing reality, not of their making. Meredith returned a few minutes later. "That went well," she observed. "Sophie is remarkably articulate for her age, but this situation has accelerated her need to understand adult relationships." "What happens to them now?" I asked. "Long term, I mean." "They'll remain in foster care while the legal proceedings continue. Lisa has requested that her cousin in Minnesota be considered for placement, but that process takes time. Home studies, background checks, court approvals. And if that doesn't work out, they would likely remain in foster care until Lisa's release, unless another family member becomes available." The goal is always to maintain family connections when possible and appropriate. I nodded, standing to leave. Thank you for arranging this. I hope it provided what Sophie needed. It did, Meredith assured me. Children in her situation often construct fantasies about unknown family members, either idealizing them or casting them as villains. Meeting you gives her reality to work with instead of imagination. As I drove back to Phoenix for my return flight, the mountain landscapes gave way to desert vistas, the changing scenery a fitting backdrop for shifting perspectives. I had entered this meeting determined to maintain emotional distance, to provide information without creating connection. I wasn't certain I had succeeded. 6 months passed with remarkable swiftness. The Portland house sold smoothly, closing exactly 30 days after I accepted the offer. I used half the proceeds to purchase additional land adjacent to my Colorado property, creating a 20-acre buffer of pristine forest that ensured privacy and expanded hiking options. My first semester teaching at Colorado State proved more rewarding than anticipated. The transition from building physical infrastructure to building knowledge in young minds energized me in unexpected ways. My practical experience differentiated my classes from purely theoretical coursework, attracting students genuinely interested in real-world applications. The legal proceedings against Lisa, Greg, and Diana continued their methodical progression. Lisa began serving her sentence at a minimum security facility in Arizona, eligible for parole in just over 2 years. Greg received a 12-year sentence after his plea deal collapsed when prosecutors discovered additional financial schemes beyond those initially documented. Diana, after an unsuccessful attempt to portray herself as another victim, accepted a 3-year sentence. I maintained regular contact with Rachel, who managed the ongoing recovery of assets. By her estimation, we had reclaimed approximately 65% of the stolen funds, a better outcome than initially projected. The Scottsdale house had been sold at auction, several investment accounts liquidated, and even some of the artwork and luxury items recovered. What I hadn't anticipated was my continued connection to Sophie and Ethan. After our initial meeting in Scottsdale, I had intended to maintain distance, to preserve the clear boundaries I'd established. Yet life rarely accommodates such neat compartmentalization. 3 weeks after our meeting, Meredith contacted me with news that Sophie had been asking about me again. Would I be willing to speak with her by video call, just once more? That second conversation led to a third, then regular monthly calls. Sophie's insightful questions and remarkable poise made refusing difficult. Ethan gradually joined these calls, his initial indifference evolving into enthusiasm as he discovered my knowledge of dinosaurs and engineering could be combined to evaluate which prehistoric creatures would make the most structurally sound bridges. A whimsical topic that nonetheless engaged his 4-year-old imagination. By the 4-month mark, I found myself sending books occasionally, children's encyclopedias for Sophie, dinosaur stories for Ethan, small gestures that maintained connection without overstepping boundaries. When Lisa's cousin Jennifer in Minnesota completed the lengthy approval process to become the children's guardian, I offered to help with the transition. Not financially, the educational trusts remained separate and anonymous, but with the emotional adjustment. Monthly video calls continued, providing stability as Sophie and Ethan adapted to their new home in Minneapolis. On a crisp October morning, as red and gold leaves drifted down around my cabin, I received an unexpected email from Dr. Werner, the psychiatrist who had facilitated my meeting with Lisa. Mr. Reed, Lisa has asked if you would be willing to receive a letter from her, not requesting response, simply sharing information she feels you should have regarding the children's developmental needs and preferences. Please advise if this would be acceptable. I sat with the request for several days before responding affirmatively. The letter arrived a week later, handwritten on institutional stationery. Thomas, first, thank you for allowing this communication. I won't pretend it's deserved or expected. Jennifer has told me about your video calls with Sophie and Ethan, about the books you've sent, the patience you've shown with their questions. I cannot adequately express what this means to them and to me. Children need stability, continuity, connections that withstand adult chaos. You've provided that despite every reason not to. I recognize the extraordinary generosity this represents, especially given the circumstances. I won't ask for forgiveness. What I did remains unforgivable. But I want you to know that in these darkest days, the knowledge that Sophie and Ethan have you as a point of stability brings me profound relief. There are practical matters regarding their development that might be helpful for you to know. Sophie processes emotional complexity through reading. Stories help her make sense of difficult situations. Ethan expresses anxiety through physical restlessness rather than words. I've enclosed drawings they sent me recently. Sophie's detailed house with the mountain behind it suggests she's finding security in her new environment. Ethan's dinosaur family represents his understanding of protection and belonging. Again, no response is expected or deserved. I simply wanted to acknowledge the grace you've shown my children. Lisa. The enclosed drawings were simple but telling. Sophie's meticulously rendered house with carefully drawn windows and doors, Ethan's vibrant dinosaurs with exaggerated protective features. I studied them carefully before placing them in a folder with the educational trust documents. Not displayed but preserved. As winter settled over the mountains, I found myself increasingly settled in my new life. The teaching position had expanded to include mentorship of graduate students working on sustainable infrastructure projects. I'd developed friendships with several faculty colleagues, particularly Eliza Thornton, a civil engineering professor specializing in earthquake-resistant design. Our professional collaboration had gradually evolved into shared hiking excursions, discussions ranging far beyond engineering principles. At 58, with adult children and 10 years post-divorce, she approached relationships with refreshing directness and independence. "You're different than most men I meet," she observed during a snowshoe hike in early December. "More present somehow, engaged rather than merely participating." "Forced perspective adjustment," I replied, watching my breath form clouds in the cold air. "When your life implodes, you either become more attentive or more detached. I chose the former." She nodded, understanding without requiring elaborate explanation. We had shared our histories in general terms, my fraudulent marriage and financial betrayal, her more conventional divorce and subsequent rebuilding. "The monthly calls with the children," she said, as we paused to admire the snow-covered valley below. "That's remarkable. Most people would maintain absolute distance." "I intended to," I admitted. "Set very clear boundaries about one meeting. No ongoing involvement, but then they were real children, not abstract concepts." Exactly. Sophie's questions, Ethan's dinosaur obsession, they became people, not just symbols of betrayal. Eliza adjusted her gloves thoughtfully. "You've created something unconventional but valuable, a connection that exists outside traditional definitions." Her observation stayed with me through the holiday season. My first in the mountains, marked by quiet celebration rather than elaborate tradition. Alan visited for 3 days around Christmas, bringing news from the financial front and genuine enthusiasm for my evolving life. "You seem at peace," he noted as we shared whiskey by the fireplace on Christmas Eve. "Not just recovering, but actually thriving." "I am," I agreed, somewhat surprised by the realization. "The teaching energizes me. The mountains center me. Even the monthly calls with the children have become something I look forward to rather than endure." "And Professor Thornton?" Alan asked with characteristic directness. "Is that developing into something significant? I considered the question honestly. It's evolving naturally, neither rushed nor stagnant. We're both cautious about definitions and expectations, but the connection is undeniable. He nodded, approving without explicitly saying so. You've rebuilt remarkably well, considering the foundation was so thoroughly shaken. Engineers training, I quipped. Assess the damage, salvage what's viable, rebuild with stronger materials. As the new year began, the regular video calls with Sophie and Ethan continued their evolution. Sophie, now 7, had developed an interest in bridges after learning about my earlier career. Did you really build a bridge that goes all the way across a river? She asked during our January call, her face serious in the video frame. I helped design several, I confirmed. The longest spans a river in Vietnam, almost a mile from one side to the other. How does it stay up? What stops it from falling? I explained the basic principles of tension and compression, using simple terms and pencil sketches held up to the camera. Sophie followed with impressive concentration, asking follow-up questions that reflected genuine understanding. Ethan, not to be outdone, showed me his latest dinosaur drawing, a stegosaurus with meticulously rendered plates. This one could make a good bridge, he declared, because of the strong back. Excellent engineering insight, I agreed seriously. The plates provide structural stability. After the call ended, I sat at my desk, contemplating the evolving nature of these connections. What had begun as a reluctant single meeting had transformed into a meaningful relationship with these children. Not parental, not avuncular in the traditional sense, but something unique and valuable nonetheless. The semester progressed with increasing momentum. My sustainable infrastructure course attracted unexpected attention when a student project won regional recognition. The department chair suggested developing a specialized certificate program based on my practical approach. My relationship with Eliza continued its thoughtful progression. Neither rushed nor artificially constrained, we established a comfortable rhythm of shared meals, mountain excursions, and intellectual discussions. The ghosts of previous relationships remained acknowledged but not dominant, informing rather than dictating our interactions. In late March, I received another communication from Lisa, this time a formal request through proper channels for permission to include me in her family therapy sessions via video conference. The therapist explained that Lisa was working through issues of accountability and honesty, particularly regarding the children's eventual understanding of their family history. My inclination was to refuse immediately. The educational trusts and monthly calls with the children maintained helpful boundaries. Participating in family therapy would blur those lines uncomfortably. Yet something in the formal, careful nature of the request gave me pause. I discussed it with Eliza during a weekend visit to her small ranch house outside Fort Collins. It's not about what you owe Lisa, she observed as we prepared dinner together. It's about what might benefit the children long term. But participating suggests a family connection that doesn't exist, I countered, dicing vegetables with perhaps more force than necessary. Does it, or does it simply acknowledge the reality that their lives and yours have become connected, regardless of how that connection originated? Her perspective, as always, offered clarity without judgment. After careful consideration, I agreed to participate in 2 sessions, not an ongoing commitment, but enough to provide insight regarding the children's needs. The first session, conducted via secure video link, was more productive than anticipated. The therapist, Dr. Reyes, facilitated a structured conversation focused not on Lisa's actions or my feelings about them, but on establishing a consistent narrative for Sophie and Ethan as they matured. Children need age-appropriate truth, Dr. Reyes explained. As they develop, their understanding will naturally become more nuanced. Our goal is to ensure the adults in their lives provide consistent information adjusted to their developmental stage. We established basic parameters for how certain questions would be answered, about Lisa's relationship with me, about her incarceration, about their biological father. Not fabrications or evasions, but thoughtfully calibrated truths that would expand naturally as their comprehension evolved. The second session, held 2 weeks later, focused more specifically on the monthly video calls and my ongoing role in the children's lives. Mr. Reed, do you intend to maintain contact with Sophie and Ethan after Lisa's release? Dr. Reyes asked directly. The question crystallized something I hadn't fully articulated even to myself. Yes, I replied, not because of any obligation, but because these connections have value to them and unexpectedly to me. Lisa, appearing on the screen from the institutional meeting room, seemed genuinely surprised by this answer. Even after everything? The children aren't extensions of past betrayals, I said carefully. They're individuals forming their own identities, their own relationships. My connection with them exists independently of our history. Dr. Reyes nodded approvingly. That's precisely the perspective that benefits children in complex family situations. They need to know relationships with them are chosen, not merely tolerated or obligatory. As spring transformed the mountain landscape, I found myself contemplating these evolving connections with increasing clarity. What had begun as catastrophic betrayal had somehow generated unexpected growth, not despite the destruction, but because of it. The Portland house, now owned by the tech executive and his family, represented a closed chapter. The Colorado property, expanded and renovated, embodied the life I was actively creating, rather than merely accepting. The teaching position engaged. Intellectual passions, long subordinated to international projects. The relationship with Eliza offered companionship without dependency. And most surprisingly, the connection with Sophie and Ethan provided an unexpected dimension of meaning. Not replacement for the children Lisa and I never had, but something entirely unique and valuable in its own right. During a weekend hike, with Eliza in late April, almost exactly 1 year after discovering Lisa's betrayal, we paused at a mountain overlook. The valley below was emerging from winter's grip, subtle greens replacing snow in undulating patterns. I've been thinking about resilience, I said as we shared water and trail mix. Not just enduring difficulty, but actually growing through it, emerging stronger, more integrated. Eliza nodded, understanding as she often did the layers beneath simple statements. The Japanese concept of kintsugi, repairing broken pottery with gold, highlighting rather than hiding the damage, treating breakage as part of the object's history rather than something to disguise. Exactly that. A year ago I thought I was facing the end of everything meaningful. Now I realize it was actually the beginning of something I couldn't have imagined. She smiled, taking my hand in a gesture that had become comfortably familiar. The foundation was stronger than you knew. As we continued our descent, I considered the accuracy of her observation. The foundation hadn't been our marriage, or joint finances, or shared history, all of which had proved devastatingly vulnerable. The true foundation was internal, the capacity to rebuild, to forge new connections, to find meaning beyond betrayal. Lisa had spent our retirement savings on her secret family, but the offshore account she never knew about, Protocol Sierra, had provided not just financial security, but time. Time to process, to evaluate, to deliberately construct, rather than merely react. The resulting life wasn't a restoration of what had been lost. It was something entirely new, more authentic, more intentional, and ultimately more fulfilling than what had been taken. Not despite the betrayal, but because the response to it had required genuine growth rather than simple recovery. As we reached the trailhead where our cars were parked, Eliza mentioned the department's end-of-year faculty dinner the following weekend. "Will you join me?" she asked. "As my official +1? The question represented a small but significant shift in our carefully calibrated relationship, a public acknowledgement of connection, a step toward defined partnership. "I'd be honored," I replied, recognizing the invitation as both simple and profound. Another conscious choice in the ongoing war, construction of a life I was actively designing rather than passively inhabiting. The offshore account Lisa never knew about had secured more than financial stability. It had provided the foundation for genuine transformation, from survival to growth, from reaction to creation, from victim to architect of a life more meaningful than I could have imagined when standing in an airport security line, staring at an empty bank account just 1 year before. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass. These up, just click and check them out.